Welcome. Okay, people are still getting situated. Looks like a wave of people. Okay, so the name of this panel is Free Market School Choice in the Mission Movement, and we've got two exceptional panel members that I'm really excited about having this conversation. John Hage, founder and president and CEO of Charter Schools USA, which I believe is the largest charter school operator in the United States, if not certainly one of them, and an exceptional charter school business, exceptional school business. And then Janine Yass, who is the founder of the Yass Prize and Stop Awards Initiative, and has with Forbes has partnered the last couple of years and has done this incredible, on top of what has been done for years, this incredible prize that we have a couple of the recipients in the room. So to start things off, maybe in addition to what I just said, John, why don't you give a little bit of your backstory, including even back to Governor Bush and even before that, if you wouldn't mind, because I think it's all relevant as it relates to kind of the mission.
Thanks. Good. All right. Thanks, Michael. It's great to be with you again on a conference. I think we've been doing this a long time. Like Jeannie Allen said earlier, if you were in that session, I don't want to say 25 years, but probably 25 years. And it's been a pleasure to be a part of what I consider to be the mission movement before it was cool and before it was called the mission movement. I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time to help Governor Bush, before he was even governor in Florida, write the charter law. And then we got it passed. We opened up the first charter school, an inner city school in urban Miami. All free, reduced lunch kids. My dad was a teacher. My mom was a teacher. I grew up in a teaching family and an education family, and I was going to be the one kid of my brothers who was not going to be in education, and here I am. It literally was my, like, you just can't make that up. And I just loved it. So I came from a policy perspective and background. I worked in think tanks before that. Before that, I was in Army Special Forces. And so for me, this was like the perfect thing where we went from an idea to implementation. And so what I love about the world that we've worked in is that we passed a law, but the most important part was then implementing that law. And you see this happen a lot of times. Policymakers across the country make laws, but then there's all of us who are left to actually implement those with fidelity and bring about the change. And that's why it's a really great partnership to work with great leaders. I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight with Governor Stitt, who's also one of those great leaders. And we appreciate what you said earlier, First Lady, about the vision that you have in that state, because that's literally what we did in Florida, is start that. And today we run about 155 schools on 100 campuses for about 80,000 students. And we're an A school system, and we serve a majority of kids that are at risk in high poverty, but we serve all students across and mostly Southeast United States.
And I'll just make an editorial comment. In Florida, rightfully gets a lot of credit for the education, innovation, and progress that it's making. But it really started 20 plus years ago with the legislation that was created when you were working for Governor Bush and the things that were done under Governor Bush. So I think that's sort of that platform that was ultimately, has been able to thrive. Started with the architecture that you guys were able to.
Personally, I have like a thing where I don't think sometimes people get enough credit for the work they do. And politics aside, Governor Jeb Bush at that time was by far the first biggest reformer on education. Today, he runs a foundation called the Foundation for Educational Excellence, which helps and supports legislatures and governors throughout the country to think about education reform and policy reforms. And I serve on his board with him, and he really is he was a leader before his time.
Yeah, and I think literally, if I got my data right, I think Florida might have been 48th out of 50 states when he took over.
Yeah, 46, and we just got ranked by U.S. News and World Report as #1.
So Janine, what about education and education freedom? Do you think people should know that maybe they don't know?
So we started the Yass Prize 3 years ago, right in the beginning of COVID. And before that, just to give you a little background, I worked with Jeannie at the Center for Education and Reform on her board. I spent a lot of time hanging out at think tanks, listening to all this great policy work that should be done for educational choice. But when COVID hit, it was just the perfect opportunity to integrate all the policy, all the philosophy on free markets and capitalist practices to take that model and implement it into the school systems in this country. Because schools shut down, I mean, that was the opportunity. I hate to say that COVID was an opportunity, but it was the silver lining that we were able to go into poor neighborhoods throughout the country and help children look for different options when their schools closed. So, in a way, just like you were saying with policy and politics, the education movement at that time really allowed me to implement all these ideas. Um, we were all depressed during COVID. All the young parents around me, they're stuck home with their children. Luckily, my kids were out of that phase. But I looked around and I called Jeannie and I said, you know, there's so much suppressing things going on. The closed schools. We supplied laptops to all the kids in Philadelphia. I went to visit the programs are open to do the blended learning on the laptops. I would go behind the laptops, and there was no learning going on. There was no one-on-one teaching going on to these poor children that were stuck, and they lost. We all know what they lost in the learning years and during COVID in those months. But slowly, Jeannie and I started to hear about bright spots in the country that were operating, that were coming to work still. And I said, Jeannie, we should right now restructure our philanthropy to support the educators that are really coming out. And our first grant was to the Black Mothers Forum in Arizona. They, like some of my middle class, upper middle class neighbors, were taking their children, 4 or 5 neighbor children, and going to churches and hiring mentors and teachers to teach the children. They were doing that, and at that time, the governor there let the money flow from the system to educate the children that way. In Philadelphia and other big cities, New York, Chicago, they weren't allowing that. But there were these bright spots that they had this choice now, this other option to go to when their public schools closed. And these were the kind of things that we wanted to support. Not only were they open, they were innovative, they were transforming kids' lives. And when schools started to open again, we thought we would end our prize. We thought this was going to be a 1 year, 2 year off mission. But what we discovered around the country, there were so many of people that wanted to stay in these schools of choice. They had to go back to their public schools. But in states like Arizona, Florida, different states around the country were learning that this money that was in the system should be following those children to where they want to go. Just like wealthy people have school choice with their school dollars, they could pick a private school. They could pick a better district school by moving out of poor cities. So it all sort of started to come together with this whole free market theory that I was talking to John last night, that education is really the only industry in America that is run by a monopoly. Um, it's the demand and the supply side of schools is completely thrown off because of this monopoly. Um, the demand is out there in cities and around the country. There's tens of thousands of kids on waiting lists to go to charter schools, private school scholarships for poor kids. The private school scholarships get gobbled up the first day they're announced. And at the same time, there's this supply of schools where children don't want to go. So it's this mess up of demand and supply because of the monopoly. I just want to tie it into the theme of the free markets here, but I hope that connects that.
No, it's awesome. So John, you've been a warrior, um, literally, but for a long time. But in the school choice charter movement, why is it controversial? I mean, doesn't most people think like people should have an opportunity to make a decision where they send their kids to the thing that's the most important thing to them when they're between 5 and 18?
Yeah, so Janine was talking to this, and she's really spot on, which is that you just have this broken problem where, people forget public education in our country is not and was never considered in our U.S. Constitution. The word's never even in there. It was a state by state process starting in Massachusetts in the late 1800s, primarily to help people read so they could be educated enough to vote. The problem is that it was never really intended to become this sort of monopoly. It was supposed to be, local schools and private and nonprofit and kind of all these options. And over time, you really found that there was just two classes of schools. There was traditional public schools, which were zip coded. Wherever your zip code is where you go to school, or private if you could afford it. That's literally the way the country has worked for almost 150 years now. So the ideas that have come about through free markets and free school choice really take both the left and the right political debates and kind of like synergize them in a weird way. In a way, it actually kind of might be the only issue that you can get people on polar opposites to agree on. And that is, shouldn't all kids have an opportunity and a right, right? Literally a right. It's a social justice right in my mind to have access to an amazing educational option, regardless of race, religion, background, where they live. At the same time, shouldn't the market, the free market, which has created the most unbelievable tools and processes and opportunities for our country and around the world, why would we leave it out of that mix? Because we know that when you don't have competition, you usually don't create better of anything. And so really the free markets and school choice coming together over the last 25 years, a lot of you have probably read about things, or you've seen charters, or you've seen that, and then you read the one negative. You see the one article, the one time someone fails. And there are failures. You don't do this without failure. But what isn't talked about enough is the 95% of incredible success that happens all the time, and usually with less resources. 99% of the time, all the schools that I operate with less money per student than the school across the street that's a traditional public school. In every case, sometimes 50 cents on the dollar. It's just this unbelievable disparity. And yet these kids are paying, and their families are paying tax dollars like any of us. And oftentimes they're actually poor. They're actually the ones who need this option more than anything. So you can make it. That's right. So you can make a case, and this has been made many times by people more eloquent than me, including my good friend T. Willard Fair, the longest-serving CEO of an urban league in America, who inspired me early on, that this is the social justice issue of our time. But it also requires free markets to think differently in how they serve kids.
Well, what we learned, this is a big learning curve for me the last 2 years. Once we started awarding great Yass prizes to wonderful providers, we started visiting them in their schools and their cities. And it's shocking, and we've been doing this work, a lot of people, for 25 years, but it's become so apparent, the discrepancy between how much a charter student is worth in a poor district versus a child that's going to the public school. We went to visit one of our top award winners last year at a school called Sail Future. He takes kids that have dropped out of school, poor, oftentimes Black, Latin students, tons of mental health issues. They've dropped out of school. They dropped out of the St. Petersburg public school system, where they spend on average $18,000 per child. They leave St. Petersburg and they go to Sail Future. Florida's voucher that they're able to get, which we applaud, but we're saying we shouldn't be applauding too loud, is $8,000 or $8,500. So imagine this child that needs more wraparound services than the kids in the public school at St. Petersburg gets less than half of what he would got if he stayed in St. Petersburg. It's ludicrous. That money is staying on the table at St. Petersburg, even though their students are leaving. It's called hold harmless. So I use this example where if every student in New York City left to go to a charter school and a private school, New York City would still be getting $30 billion a year, Jeannie, in their district budget. And those other children that go to charters and private schools are getting oftentimes less than half of that. And the private Catholic schools cost a third of that. So why is it that all these children are worth less money? Is because the monopoly is holding on to all that money, and they're not free to choose where they want to take it.
So let's talk about misaligned incentives. So just kind of have a little math exercise with me. So first of all, think of another business where you had the incentive to do less of what you're doing because you'll make more. Secondly, let's do some quick math. $18,000 in St. Petersburg. Let's say there's 20,000. Say there's 20 kids in a classroom. So that's $360,000, right? What does the average teacher make in St. Petersburg? 50.
Without benefits.
Okay, let's throw 10 in for benefits. So let's just make the math easy. So 60,000. So 360, 60,000, $300,000. Where does that money go? Exactly. Where does that money go? Well, the point. I mean, you can't think of it.
Where's the money?
So basically, if you look at the math, about 75 to 8% goes outside of where the service. You can't think of another service industry which exists in the world where more money is spent outside of where the service is being rendered than inside the service. It makes no sense. But I think so. I don't want to get hung up on choice for now. I hope there would be very little debate in this room whether choice is a good idea or not, or people should have an option to attend great schools. Let's talk about innovation, because in the Yass Prize has been, and you should just give a little bit of Jeannie gave a little bit of a commercial for applying for it, but talk about just very quickly, what is it? How who are you awarding? How much money you providing? What are you hoping?
So again, we developed this during COVID when we had a lot of time to be on Zoom calls for weeks at a time. But for so many years, Jeff and I would go to visit a school that needed money. And I would walk into these schools and I would start to cry because I would see unbelievable conditions and I would say, oh, we have to give them money. And I would go back 2 or 3 years later and I would cry again because they didn't do anything with the money. So I said, we have to start putting conditions on this for the kids' sake. This is not helping children just to give everyone money like this. So the principles behind our award are called STOP principles. The S is for sustainability, which I was talking about, to try to get money from the system that's already in the system to follow the child. So our grants could work like seed money to start schools. Transformational, if you want to talk about transformational, what happened during COVID, education has not caught up with technology. And I was saying just before the session that the education schools in this country, master's degrees, are teaching Dewey Decimal System courses. They're not even looking at AI and these things that are out there, how kids want to learn. Taylor here is in the front row, one of our first year awardees, had kids coming back to school during COVID because I'm getting too old to understand this, I always say, but she created a whole metaverse of how kids wanted to learn and is making up this amazing computer program going around the country with this. This is how kids want to learn. Their outcomes are better. And everyone's scared about AI and ChatGPT and everything. And I think, that's not going to have any effect on this whole education system because the unions of monopoly are not going to allow that in. They're not going to allow that in for the curriculums. They're going to say, oh, that's a good idea to do after school. One of our first year top award winner was an after school program during COVID that became the school. And I had this idea where, I was lucky enough I had 4 children that went to good schools from 8 o'clock in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. After school, they would do sports, or maybe they would need extra help somewhere off and on, but they did not have to go to another after school program to make up for lost learning time that they sat in a seat from 9 o'clock in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. And I thought, this is unfair. Poor children have to sit in front of maybe sometimes no teachers teaching. They have to sit there, and then we expect them to make it up after school at boys' clubs, girls' clubs. I mean, my own kids would not have that attention span. No kid would, to have to expect to make that up after school. So now that we have transformational learning in place, they could do that so much more efficiently. And the system is not going to allow that. We don't have to worry about how it's going to affect kids if the system doesn't allow it.
So, John, talk about some of the ways that what you've learned in the nearly 30 years you've been running schools. Forget a little data too. Number of schools, number of students, And but what are some of the things that you've seen are the most important? You talk about it's not really about money, right?
Right. So I think what Janine is saying is what we're both saying, which is that there's this real hunger for supply. The demand is there. Right now, if every state had a voucher system in place, I know that's supposed to be the wrong way to say it, an ESA, an education savings account, call it whatever you want to make it sell politically, but that basically the backpack goes with the child wherever they go. And if you did that in every state right now, you would never have enough schools of the type of schools that people want to go to available for those students. In Florida, where they just approved, it's the 5th state, I believe now, Jeannie, I think, um, universal ESAs, where anyone can use that backpack to go to any school. We already know, because John Kirtley, who runs the program in the state, is a friend and a partner in these ideas. They have hundreds of thousands of students already saying they want to use that. Mostly kids stuck in failing traditional schools wanting to use that backpack to go somewhere. There's not enough schools available for those students. So the first thing is, this industry we're in the first inning, maybe the end of the first inning, beginning the second inning of a really long game. School choice is a 100-year initiative. When I worked with Jeannie, and I was also on the CER, her work that she's done at CER preceded my work, quite frankly. She was doing thinking on this stuff years before I actually got into implementing it. And the facts are that we need more people like us, to be honest. One of the things I've really tried to do is inspire young entrepreneurs and thinkers to invest in, to put time, energy. I know this is what Michael and Deborah have done for years, is create an entire investment community where the capitalist system of this country, which has trillions of dollars to invest in ideas, should be investing it in education, which is why you're all here, because there's a relationship to those parts. So I just happen to be in a great place where we've been able to do that for 25 years with fidelity, not always perfectly, made mistakes, we've pushed out on the envelope. Sometimes those mistakes have cost us something, but it's been never a job. Like, honestly, when you do what you love, the old saying, you just never feel like it's work. And so I think when people have that do good, do well, the thing that this is, this mission movement idea around, it really does change the way you work. And I think that's what's inspiring, is to try to get more people to think that way, like we're doing in our organization. And that's why the Yass Prize is important, because it's inspiring those creations and to change that dynamic. Because before that, there weren't enough people at a high enough profile that would represent that would stand out and say, that matters. We're going to put money behind that. We're going to put initiatives behind that. We're going to fight for it. It's too long been like the backbenchers fighting for this, but this is becoming now, I truly believe, transformational. I would predict in the next 10 years that most states in this country, 25 to 30 of them, maybe even less than maybe 5 years, will have some form of a full ESA in place that will allow. We have more than that now with minor programs, but I mean really where the true money follows the student, and that will change everything. Because once you have that market force in place, then the demand side is there. It's now just, can we create enough high-performing, high-quality educational environments? Not just schools, by the way. School's not the way to think. It's learning, it's techniques, it's all kinds of approaches. For example, we're getting ready to start some private schools. We're now doing early learning centers. We have several pods that are small micropods that have started out through the pandemic. And so we do believe that all of these things have merit long term.
So interesting. You really, after your Charter School USA gig, you need to get in politics, because I asked you a question and you went exactly. You gave this great speech about all the things you wanted to talk about, which are way better than my question, by the way.
Lesson one is to say what you want to say, not what you're asking.
You did it perfectly. But go ahead. You're gonna say.
As one other point I wanted to make was that I know, I guess, like Bill Gates and Walton, they might be like poster guys, people for capitalism. But, even if there were 1 million Bill Gates, and there would not be enough philanthropy to solve this problem in the country. There is already so much money in these systems that is not being held. The people are not being held accountable how they're spending it, and there has to be an approach, in places where there aren't monopolies. Healthcare. Healthcare has done a lot of partnerships, public-private partnerships. Let someone name a wing of a hospital after their family, and then healthcare public dollars will come in and help with insurance costs with that public insurance. Same thing with housing. I have friends that are provide affordable housing around the country. They're allowed to go into different cities, build the affordable housing. Those people come in and they get public dollars for their housing vouchers. You know, when I explain this to people that have grown up with public housing vouchers, it's like this aha moment. They get how it works. They don't have to be directed to the projects that they had to burn down after a couple generations of people lived in the Bronx in these projects. They took a housing voucher and they could take that voucher to the house that they want to rent. Why can't education work that way? It does in other industries.
100%. Maybe just to follow up, you mentioned the Gates Foundation, and obviously you have a foundation that's focused on what can philanthropies besides what should philanthropies be doing to use their capital to really focus and prioritize good things, or what do you think they could do different, or they should be focused on?
In education or just in general?
Education.
I think that more philanthropists in education should, I would been thinking about this, join together so we're a little bit stronger. I don't have that special forces background that John Hage has, that we get beaten up a lot in the press, you know, in our daily lives now, that we are told to go away, stop stealing children from systems. You know, they want to own these children in public schools that are failing, that families don't want anymore. We have no skin in the game. We don't have kids in the systems anymore. Our kids are all out of college. They want to say that we're making money. Show me that. They paint us like we're wanting to destroy public education. And I'm also from a family of teachers, school librarians, that I think teachers should get paid more money. I think bad teachers should be fired. And I wouldn't want to go into teaching if a teacher next door to me was not doing their job. And that's what you see when you visit public schools. I invite more people to go see what's going on in the public schools. And that did become more clear during COVID when parents did see who wasn't showing up for work in the morning. That happened for 25 years before when I was visiting schools. I knew that. A lot of people don't know that. Bad schools should close. Bad charter schools should close. But during COVID, all that money was staying in the system. Private schools, I mean, that's a capitalist system, private schools were charging more and more money because more kids wanted to go there. So I think for philanthropists just have to be, get some armor, you know, get some security, and bond together, because we're just doing this for kids to have the same opportunities that wealthier children have in this country.
I just want to say one thing. You don't realize what Janine and her husband have done, how rare it is. And that is, they put their money where their mouth is, and they actually drove it against something that wasn't just right down the middle. Too much money in this country still just sort of maintains the current system, actually props it up, keeps it going without being really accountable for that money. So being willing to go in and actually challenge that, put dollars, you think that's really controversial. It's actually probably, you know, caused her some physical threats to her and her family. Like, that's how crazy it is out there. That's the level of monopoly you're dealing with. People forget 65 million students in this country go to schools. 90% of them still go to public schools. Okay? That's only changing by incremental efforts, but at some point it's going to have a massive turn. And it's starting to happen in certain markets, right? You see it in certain places around the country where there's enough momentum where it's no longer acceptable to just, and it's not an anti-public school. Charter schools are public schools. No one pays a tuition to go to those schools. It's just that the private and public sector together can do things that a traditional public sector can't do. At the end of the day, when I say to folks, I say, do you want your kids educated by the DMV, right? literally, like the DMV, or pick a private-public partnership, because they're all over the place. Most hospital systems are built that way. Most road systems are built that way nowadays. Most anything that's done well. And so
You're speaking to Cliff's ears.
yeah. So you've got to be willing to look at the system underlying it. And at the end of the day, if the supply outstrips the demand, then that's a great place to be. But we're on the other side right now. We still don't have enough supply.
Well, I think what's sad to me is I don't think anything Janine said was controversial at all. Right. And most of what you said wasn't controversial at all. Some of what you said was controversial. Yes, but I think to use the Barry Weiss comment. I mean, by the way, school choice. How is that controversial, right? It's what Barry Weiss calls the closet of normal people. And the closet of normal people need to stand up and sort of say, like, it's crazy. Of course, kids should have choice. Let's move on. Yeah. I want to talk about innovation. Go ahead.
I was going to make one other comment that Jeff and I do not want to sprinkle our philanthropy around so people have to write us thank you letters every day. Poor families should not be beholden to philanthropy to educate their children. The money is there to follow children in the system. Parents work hard. That's their tax dollars at work. They should have ownership of where they want to take that money for kids. We don't want school buildings named after us. I'm saying, like, it's really just a matter of humanity that poor people should not have to ask philanthropists for money for children. It's in the system.
Amen. So let's talk about innovation. Okay, and you both your seat as the CEO of the largest charter school business, and yours is with all the stuff you've done for a long time, but now with this Yass Prize, with all these things. What are some of the innovations that you see going on that excite you?
So I know, the thing about this marketplace of school choice is that you have thousands of innovations happening, but they need to be scaled. So one of the things that I love is that you're able to actually beta test that stuff every day with kids and families, with their buy-in, with their involvement, with them wanting to be a part of it. So what we've done is we've gone to some of the best innovators in the country through your conferences and other places and said, hey, if you have something, we put you through a process, because we're really like a national system of charter schools. We're going to make it, we're going to vet you. But if we like what we hear, we think what you can do is going to be additive to the student-parent experience, then we're going to let you come in our schools and we're going to beta test you. We might put you in 3 schools, 1 school, maybe all 100 schools, who knows, depending on what you're doing. And we've done that now with dozens of companies. And what we do is we ask those companies to share that data back with us. And then our teachers, we actually ask them, would you give our teachers a little supplement? So sometimes they'll give them we have one right now where it's $1,500 extra for those teachers. They'll download some data each day. They'll provide that information, and it helps that product get better, smarter, faster. Then when it goes to the larger marketplace of 60+ million students, they have years of information, data that works. And we're at the better part because we're actually the innovation cut. We're really doing the cutting work inside of our schools that's oftentimes bringing something later on We've done this from everyone from power schools at the big level down to small mom and pop startups. And I'm going to tell you, a lot of those innovations are now in the greater system. And now we're working on 2.0 and 3.0 and those products and services.
Well, the first time I saw the owl was in your classroom. But
perfect expansion.
But what do you say to people that say, well, I don't want you to experiment on my kids?
So we actually always involve the parents and the kids. So we don't call it experimentation. First of all, that's not the right word. We ask them.
I'm just quoting.
No, I know, I did say that. So, but what I say to them is I say, look, you chose us, and we want you to understand what you're getting when you come here. So we're really upfront with our parents, and we say, look, this is a school that's going to test the limits. We're going to try new things. We're going to try, AI with personal learning plans, because everybody wants PLPs, but until AI came along, it was almost impossible to pull off a personal learning plan so that all thousands of kids in the school can actually have a customized learning plan for each one of them. During the pandemic, you mentioned this, we ended up getting national and international press on it. 1 month into the pandemic, I literally did that 4 a.m. in the morning wake up thing, sweaty, going, oh my gosh. Looked over to my wife and said, we've got to do something. This is ridiculous. They're going to keep these schools shut for who knows how long, including ours. And these kids cannot learn through these virtual platforms alone. They're just not robust enough. It's just, they're not built for this. And we had pivoted pretty quickly, faster than any public system we were in. But what we hadn't really done is left that teacher involved with those students. So honestly, I said, let's look up what is the best technology. We did a whole bunch of research. We found the OWL. It worked for us. It's the cylindrical hardware. We put it in the middle of a classroom. We hooked it up on the ceilings, or we put it right there. We actually had teachers coming back to classrooms before even students. They were teaching in their classroom. The students felt like they were in a classroom. Then we brought in 6 kids. 6 kids in a classroom, all space. 6 in a home. 6 or 10 maybe in the library or over in the mess hall. And you ended up creating the classroom going to kids. Why do I say that? Not because it's a product I'm selling. Honestly, it was something we invented for ourselves. So what we did is we just used, I think of it this way, Michael. I think when you have everything in our system has to work to succeed. We don't have schools don't last. They don't stick around. We go to business if our schools don't do a better job with the resources we have. If kids don't sign up and parents don't sign up, then the school shuts down. So our incentives are built upon performance. The performance is always around what are we creating or working with others to create that can ultimately help those students in the classroom, help those families experience a better result, and then being really open with it. We open that up. It's an open source process for us.
So what other, what other innovations have you seen? And again, let's throw Janine too.
Yeah.
That excite you. You mentioned the Sail Academy in Florida, which is super cool. What are some others that you've seen that you've been excited about?
Let me think for a second. There's so much I'm excited about. I have to edit it out. I think with technology now, how children want to learn. Like again, I'm old. My kids are all out of school, but I remember it doesn't really take super duper technology to realize how good the teachers are that your children have. You know, at the first 10 minutes of back to school night, whether or not your kid is going to progress in math that year. And we, like I said, we were able to have the luxury of going to private schools. There was a good math teacher and there was a bad math teacher. And if Robbie got stuck with the bad math teacher that year, I was like, oh darn, there's not much we could do. That was, 12 years ago, before computers. I met Sal Khan then, and it was like he was trying to describe to me what he could do. Today, that still has not been integrated into the school systems, where your child, Sal Khan, could hire the best Algebra 1 teacher in 8th grade, and your child would be guaranteed, every child, rich, poor, in between, have the same best teacher. And that technology, again, the monopoly has blocked that. Sal Khan cannot download that content to all poor children. They have to do it, like I said, after school. So I think breaking down the walls between technology, I hope that is going to be disruptive and that's going to make education more equitable in this country. We have to make sure that money follows children, so we're not supporting these two systems. One, kids are leaving the system because they don't want to learn that way. That's why they're leaving the schools. All the talk this past couple of days about mental health issues. If your child is not engaged with a teacher and with a great learning program, they're not going to have any hope. These blended learning programs and new ways of teaching these kind of curriculums, it's how children want to learn. And to me, that's the most exciting thing, that downloading this stuff into the classroom. Again, they have to have a human element with a teacher as mentors, but I just think that the future is going to be wide open to see how the outcomes could progress with technology.
So John, what percentage of the teachers in your schools are there for any other reason than being a mission motivation?
I'd say less than maybe in a first year teacher, you get some as much as you try to vet that. But after 1 year, you're not going to be there if you're not mission driven, because you're already working longer days. You have more creativity. You get paid differently because there's merit. You get opportunities to have all kinds of special involvements project wise. you're just not a typical teacher. So in our model, we look for educators who are, quite frankly, they tend to be younger because they come out of the university systems thinking differently. We're doing a lot more around creating teacher content. So we're using some of the technologies we've worked with others on to now have a kind of a almost like a teacher curator for content, where the teachers are now sharing that content. Our best math teachers are now, you see these mega churches where the pastor comes on and there's 18 other campuses. Well, why can't you have teachers that are the best teachers that are being able to be supplemented with still that teacher aid in a classroom? So we're definitely working in that environment a lot as well, to challenge the status quo.
So, John, your governor just applied for a new job, and so if you if you were the governor of Florida and you wanted to accelerate what's going on there in terms of just not only choice but education attainment, what would be some of your key steps?
I think our country's hungry for leadership on education like never before. And by the way, it's now top 3 on some of the national polls. Depends which time and where. Economics are always number 1. But I think we're at a turning point where people are kind of tired of education being the place by which we're going to try to teach kids what to know, or how we want to teach them how to think, not necessarily what to think. And that kind of is becoming the bigger and bigger dividing line. So I think a leader in a state that helps people understand that our students need to have critical thinking skills, that we need to be absolutely capable of competing with China and any other country. The U.S. still has something that no other country has. We have this entrepreneurial spirit. We have this willingness to try things. We're way more willing to take big risk. And that has to transfer into our students. And classrooms and setups that do that, almost like an MBA course for students, are going to challenge that. So if I was a leader of a state, what I would do is I would take some of we have the highest performing higher education system in the world. And there's a reason why it performs where it does, and K-12 education is where probably 30th in the country, in the world right now. And the reason is that higher education was never a monopoly from the beginning. That's just the simple answer. It's always been every university's had to compete for research dollars, to innovate, to create. SMU has to make sure it's doing something different and better to make sure SMU is delivering every day and is in existence 100 years from now. In education, you need the same mindset all the way through to the school level. Every school ought to act as if it is a small university that actually innovates just like a university does. It has to bring in those research dollars. It has to take those dollars and innovate with it. Everybody should be competing for the Yass Prize. Basically, that would be my answer.
Janine, we get the final word. What would you like to see lead with this group, or what you'd like to see them do to have every kid be able to reach their potential?
I think that we need to ask everybody in all different industries and from all walks of life to make sure that their local media outlets are covering this fairly, that they're not being too radical and painting people that are in favor of school choice as trying to destroy public education. We just want more choice for all children. And you do have to engage politically, unfortunately, and I did not know that when I first got started in all this, but it is a political issue, and ask your mayors, your city council people where their children go to school, because oftentimes there's a big hypocrisy in this. A lot of elected officials that are against this decide to send their children to private schools. Somehow they could do it. So it should be everyone's. I guess we need it to be more of a bigger bandwagon and not be painted that we're being right-wing extremists wanting to destroy public school. We just want education in this country to be better and more equitable for everyone.
With that, thank you.
Thank you.